Okay. This is the vlog for July 19th, 2018, and today is the 5th month since, it's been 5 months since I started the vlog. So we're almost to half a year. That'll be next month, right around my half birthday. I'm a bit worn out. I had a busy day at work today. Sort of a frustrating busy instead of a rewarding busy. I really like having like a million different things to do and getting them all done in an organized fashion. Keeping track of, 20 different things moving in space is sort of something I like to think I'm good at and I'm proud of. But what I was busy with today was just filling out one long spreadsheet. So, that's obviously a lot less rewarding. It was a lot of work and I did fairly well on it, but it's draining. So, as you may have noticed from the thumbnail, I found something interesting. I was going looking for my old dice that I have had to replace since I lost track of where I put them. I think I've moved twice since I last used them. But I found this. This is the box to a game that I had a lot of fondness for called Planescape Torment. Now, Planescape itself was a revolutionary campaign setting in Dungeons and Dragons because it was the first campaign setting that really tackled the multiverse aspect of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is actually a variety of worlds because each dungeon master is free to create their own world. And those worlds connect to one another through portals, and each world has its own prime material plane, which I think they just call material planes now. And those planes have echoes of themselves. One is sort of positive energy called the Feywild, and one is negative energy called the Shadowfell. And the Shadowfell's sort of general appearance has been popularized by Stranger Things. The Upside Down very much is the Shadowfell. Nothing I've seen has quite captured what the Feywild has been described as, a world of constant twilight where the sun is always right at the horizon, bathing everything in a golden glow, but it's never night and it's never really day either. And mystical, whimsical things populate this bright side of the normal world. But Planescape doesn't concern itself with any particular material plane, and it doesn't concern itself with the Feywild or the Shadowfell. Planescape is all about the outer planes. The outer planes, of which there are like 22 or something like that, are arranged in a sort of circle. And the sort of positive, nicer planes are called the upper planes, and the nasty, negative, other planes are the lower planes. And each one sort of represents an alignment and also a concept in real-world mythology. So some of the positive upper planes include Elysium, which was Greek afterlife for people that wanted to relax and just spend time with their loved ones who had also passed away. There were also the seven heavens. I can't remember which culture they came from, but they were sort of more rigid and probably closer to what Judeo-Christianity envisions heaven to be like. There was Mount Olympus, which I think was sort of chaotic. No. Mount Olympus was sort of straddling neutrality and chaos, but the real chaotic good upper plane was Valhalla, where you went if you were a strong warrior who had died in battle and had gained glory and honor both. You got to go to Valhalla and drink and party until the battle that ended the world, and then you would show up and do that and be part of whatever came afterwards. Norse mythology was very, very explicit, particular, and weird. It's the only mythology I know of with a god squirrel. Madagascar. I don't know. You got to go to a couple of these places. There are two places that were of particular note, which were Mechanus, the plane of ultimate law, and Limbo, the plane of ultimate chaos. I might be getting the name wrong on Mechanus, but the idea is that it was mechanical. It was gears and clockwork and pulleys, and it was tended to by the modrons, which are these little geometric shaped fellows who are semi-mechanical and usually have one big dominating eye as part of their features. And they just tend to the machinery forever. And any sort of irregularity needs to be found and reported properly through the proper bureaucracy and then fixed as necessary to keep all the gears and clockwork spinning forever. Chaos, on the other hand, had Limbo, which is exactly what you would expect. Limbo is an extraordinarily dangerous place, even if you are well-meaning or well-protected, because there are pockets of stability floating in chaos, because even chaos is not completely chaotic, such as the nature of chaos. Sometimes patterns emerge. That's where you get chaos theory, at least, or so I'm told. But for the places where reality isn't sort of set, entering in them is very, very dangerous, because you could simply cease to exist or turn into something completely different, or any number of things could happen to you. You could become more than one person. You could fuse with some sort of inanimate object and become semi-animate. Limbo is a weird place, and it's hard to do that in a video game. So I think all the places you could go to were those sort of stable-ish pockets, but you had to deal with the Slad. The Slad are a weird sort of creature that have managed to infiltrate other fantasy game experiences. They appear to be giant humanoid toad creatures. The ones in D&D have a bunch of different varieties based on their color, but one of the common themes is they can infect you with one of their attacks, which causes either you to become a Slad or for a tadpole to burst out of your chest, very alien style. So I'm talking a lot about Planescape and how much I loved it. I've talked about Planescape before, but what I concerned myself with this morning before I went to work were goblins. Goblins are interesting to me because they have this weird place in the hierarchy of Dungeons and Dragons where they are generally just seen as fodder. They are just something that you can kill no matter how weak you are, because goblins are always weaker. They're small. They're almost always mean. They gather in numbers to offset the fact that individually they can be punted by any able-bodied adventurer. And all it takes is one good cast of magic missile and they're toast. But even back when I was playing 2nd edition, there were always these little minor outlier rules that allowed you to play as monsters, and Goblin was like one of the few monsters, along with Orc, that seemed almost ready to be a official player race. And I'm sort of surprised that they didn't jump in both feet. I sort of get why they didn't make Goblin an official race in 5e, because they were really trying to get back to their roots more than anything with 5th edition. They were trying to get back to the good times from 3rd and 3.5 and from 2nd edition even, with just a couple of extra additions, like Dragonborn and Tieflings, because of their popularity during the 4e period, are again a core race. They're uncommon races, so they're not generally suggested for first-time players. The 5 races that you generally see in fantasy, which are humans, dwarves, halflings, elves, and gnomes, or the 5th one's sort of a floating point that can be a lot of different things, but gnomes had been taken out as a core race for example, in 4E, but were put back in as a core race in 5E, they're also listed as uncommon, as are half-elves and tieflings. Tieflings were a huge success, and tieflings, as it turns out, are largely considered invented for 3rd edition. They existed in 2nd edition. It just took a long time for people to accept them as a common race. But that definitely changed between 3.5 and 4. They may have been a core race in 3.5. I can't remember exactly. The first tiefling, though, that I ever ran into was in this game. I can't remember her name, but she did not want you to touch her leathers. I remember that much. She was a thief. She didn't have horns like so many tieflings are famous for now, but she did have a tail, and she had a bad attitude, but she was a lot of fun to have in the party. And as the only major thief, she had a skill set that was going to come in useful in a lot of different situations if you ever wanted to take something, for example. And you encountered her pretty early. You just had to be very careful with your conversation with her, and she'd basically join your party automatically. But goblins. Goblins are small and kind of pathetic, but I want them to have a much bigger part in the Dynostria campaign. Goblins are one of the races that were slaves in the ancient Shining Empire that was formed over 1,000 years ago. And while all the other slave races have been freed and have been sort of reintegrated into society with general levels of success, goblins have not shared in that spirit of coming together. They still live very much as second-class citizens wherever they go, and they're seen as inferior, they're treated despicably, and the best that they've managed to get in Dynostria are literally reservations of land that have been set aside by other national governments for goblins to live on, most of which is not native goblin land at all. The goblins themselves aren't exactly sure where they come from. There's some evidence to suggest that they are related to elves, but there's equal evidence to suggest they're somehow mixed up with halflings, even though they don't have a lot of... They weren't from the same areas that halflings were. It's just sort of it's possible that it was just convergent evolution. Two small races that ended up acting very similarly in a lot of ways because being small affords you a certain perspective in the world. I'm not saying what it is exactly because I haven't decided myself for certain, but they are a race that you can play as. I have taken some of the rules I've found online for goblins as a player race in 5e and expanded on them so that they're closer in power to like halflings or dwarves. In fact, they may be a little too powerful. I came up with one rule and had to really scale it back quickly when I realized how useful it would have been, called Intense Focus, which allowed them to have advantage whenever they were making a concentration check and had to roll to maintain concentration. Being able to do that whenever they wanted ended up being a little too powerful. So I gave it more broader applications, but you can only use it once before having to take a rest. So, balance. I'm at 13 minutes now, so Goblins and Torment. Seems fitting. I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.